Hi, I'm Jennifer, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture. Welcome back to our podcast. In this episode, we are going to focus on a few notable places that should be on every traveler's list. Wanting to go to Japan comes with a lot of planning, as there are many different places to visit. If you dream of going to Japan, but need some tips on where to go once you're there, this episode is for you. At the same time, if you've already been to Japan, or perhaps you live there now, this episode can also be for you, as there are so many places to discover in any country, and chances are, there are some on our list that you might not have considered. We'll have a special guest from Visit Japan to help us give you some insight on where to travel. Hopefully by the end of this episode, you will have a list of amazing recommendations to add to your Japan travel agenda. So today I have with me some of the crew. We have Nigel and Doug.
What up?
Hey, what's up?
So today we're going to be talking about, just basic travel episode. And the first thing I wanted to mention is, the four main islands that consist of Japan. Even though Japan itself is an island, it's surrounded by water, but there are four main islands of Japan that people can travel to. They are Hokkaido, the island of Honshu, Shikoku, and there's Kyushu. So for Nigel and Doug, I'm sure y'all know from experience, but a lot of people mostly stick to the island of Honshu, the main island, just because it does have a lot of destinations that, a lot of people talk about. But what are some features of the other islands? So like Hokkaido, I feel, is probably something that maybe a lot of travelers don't go to, but maybe they should. What do y'all think?
Snow.
Snow.
No, Hokkaido is, I've actually never been, but I know they have their Yuki Festival, like their snow festival every January, February, where they have the snow sculptures, and they're really, it's kind of like that's their thing. That's what they puts them on the map a lot of times.
And
Nigel, have you ever been?
Unfortunately, I haven't. That was on my list of things to do in my canceled 2020 trip. So next time I make it back to Japan, I'm hoping that I get the chance to. But some of the things that I think about undoubtedly, though, are the city of Sapporo, which we know for the beer here. I also think of the famous ski resorts and really an abundance of natural landscapes as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far removed from like the central parts of the country where everyone thinks of, so it's
and I think part of the reason why is because for most of Japan's history, it's taken place mainly on the islands below Hokkaido, and the government of Japan didn't actually start exploiting Hokkaido and its resources until the year 1859. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't groups of people living on this island of Hokkaido. Most notably is the Ainu people, which we actually should do a whole episode on. Nevertheless, the history of Japan's involvement with Hokkaido has really left it as a place where you can still really connect with nature and sort of this outdoors capital.
Yeah, it kind of has its own ecosystem working over there, honestly. Now, one of the things that I want to point out about Hokkaido, which us as native New Orleans, we are very hot climate. So probably for us personally, the best time to go to Hokkaido is probably during the summer when it's a little easier temperature for us to handle. Because I know myself, winter in Hokkaido would probably be miserable for me.
I mean, winter in Japan in general is pretty miserable, but I don't know if any of you guys haven't been there for winter time. I think I know both of you.
The latest I've been, well, I guess technically the earliest winter I've been is in November. So
Okay.
It didn't get too cold. It was bearable.
Yeah, it starts to get really frigid in December, January, February. Those months are pretty brutal. I think it's accentuated by, and this goes for the whole country, not just Hokkaido, but it's accentuated by the insulation lacking and central heating and central air. So, you kind of have to bundle up under a kotatsu or something to keep warm, or just bundle up in general. I used to wear sweatshirts and layers inside my house to walk from my bedroom to my kitchen, you know?
Well, that's a
So,
good point. So to contrast that, Kyushu, that's the most southern island of Japan as a country. You have places like Fukuoka and Kagoshima. Even Okinawa is considered in Kyushu. So like you have different, climates, different lifestyles. So really, to get our point across about these four main islands, going to travel to Japan, you are traveling Japan, but you're not seeing all of Japan if you just go to a few places. Don't hesitate to be like, oh, I've seen Japan, even though I've only been to like five places. Each destination in Japan is going to be very, very unique. And it's going to be an experience that you can't get anywhere else. So, really, don't set yourself up to be limiting yourself with your travel. Um, this is probably going to take multiple trips to Japan to experience all of Japan, obviously. But you really want to explore all of your options in Japan because each destination is going to be very, very different, even if it's within the same country. So that's kind of what I wanted to get across with these four islands. They're very different. So you really have to go to each one to really experience all of Japan.
yeah, and I mean, if you think about it too, each one of them is pretty far from, like, I guess, the old capital of Kyoto or the more modern capital of Tokyo. They're all kind of, with the exception of Shikoku, which is, my friends would say like Shikoku, they'd switch out the kanji of for the kanji for death, and they'd say like you go there to die, which is horrible. But but like it's very, they're very much apart from, I guess, where it's concentrated.
Yeah, yeah. Some of these places, I mean, there's still an important history that happens in these places, but for example, places like Kyushu, where the famous city of Nagasaki is located, Nagasaki is actually geographically closer to Shanghai than it is Tokyo.
But I'm glad you brought that up because my next topic that I want to talk about is, with traveling to Japan, especially for first timers who've ever been to Japan, the popular tourist destinations, and I call it the main three, are Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. They seem to be the most popular places to go visit, and for good reason. I actually planned out an itinerary for two of my friends who were going to Japan in 2019. They seemed to have a fun time. But, because it was their first time, even myself, I put Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka in their itinerary because those were, three places that, as first time going to Japan, I felt, it was necessary for them to go. So, kind of what I want to talk about briefly is, explain why these three are just commonly suggested. What is so ingrained into our brains as like Japan enthusiasts where we feel these three are so notable that like people have to go, not even just once, but sometimes over and over again.
Yeah, and it's funny you said, when you put that itinerary together, because I mean that's kind of like a common itinerary called like the Golden Route. I mean that's not just those three places. There's a few other ones that are on there, but those are your staples if you're going to Japan, because I know you guys have been to Kyoto way more than me. I've only been there, I think, twice. Um,
Yeah, that's like my second
yeah,
home over
and I
there.
think it's probably been like 2 days twice, like total. So I've not really experienced Kyoto like you guys have. But Tokyo is like what everybody thinks of. Japan is Tokyo, or Japan is Kyoto. Like those are like your two kind of preconceived ideas of like what you want to experience in Japan, the more traditional and the more modern, in two separate places. Osaka's kind of weird because it's just next door to, it's like basically Tokyo next to Kyoto, a mini version of it, but it has its very own distinct
It's a very
culture.
easy skip and a jump from Kyoto to Osaka.
Yeah.
And I feel like Osaka is like a more casual Tokyo.
Yep.
It has a more casual feel. it's not as chaotic, maybe is the word I'm looking for. But yeah, no, I think that's why Osaka's kind of just shoved in there as the third one. It's just those three are just so kind of mainstream, easy to jump to from a Shinkansen. Those are your main transports. Those are your main stops on a Shinkansen are those three.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think you can fault anyone for wanting to visit Tokyo, of course. I mean, not only is it the capital, it's the most populous city in the world. And for many people, it's kind of, one of their main ideas of Japan. So that certainly makes sense. But I think Kyoto makes just as much sense. It's one of the places where you can really see that traditional culture really kind of meshing with the modern times. And that's really unique. So that makes sense too. And then Osaka also makes sense. I mean, it's the second most populous city, and there's a hustle bustle to it, but like you said, in a little bit more of a relaxed way, and that has its own draw to it.
And one thing too, just with Kyoto, because I think both times I went, um, they do a really good job of preserving their
Yeah.
buildings and preserving their landmarks that people want to see. The
Mm.
only problem is sometimes you end up traveling there and you Ginkakuji or Kinkakuji is a bunch of scaffolds and tarp. It's covered because you're like catching it at a time when they're restoring it around that time of year or something like that. So that's the only downfall. It's really tricky. You can't really plan around that because you don't really have a schedule that's published when it's going to be like under renovation. Because that's happened to me quite a few times at some temples, just because again they do such a great job at preserving these tourist destinations. I don't want to say tourist, but cultural destinations that people from outside of Japan, but also inside of Japan, want to see.
Yeah. So now that we talked about the main three that, everyone always hears about, but what about our personal travel suggestions? Each of us, I want us to choose one to feature that we feel people must go to in our own opinion, and just kind of like give them a short reason of why they should go visit.
I mean, for me, I know we already mentioned it, but for me, it has to be Kyoto. I mean, it's a city that is over 1,000 years old. It's designed after the ancient Chinese capital of Chang'an, which basically means that it has a very logical layout of the city. And you can still see this today. It's such a wonderfully designed city where everything makes sense and it's very easy to get around, despite it being a pretty big city. Now, it's nowhere near as the size of Tokyo or anything like that, but for a city that has over 1 million people, it's surprisingly easy to get around. I think another thing about Kyoto that's so amazing is that, again, it's over 1,000 years old. So it's seen a lot of history. And one of the really interesting moments in history is the point in time which it served as the capital of Japan. And it did that at a time where the arts and culture of Japanese society were really hitting a zenith. And so much of what we think of as traditional Japanese culture actually has its origins in this time period. So that's really fascinating. You also have things like what's commonly attributed as the first novel in the world, The Tale of Genji. It's being written in this city during this same time period. The Japanese writing systems also created during this time. You have, very important works of poetry, very important works of art and clothing. There's so much going on here. So the really fascinating thing about Kyoto is all of this traditional culture kind of blends into the modern in Kyoto today. And you can still see traditional architecture, practices, food, art, still very much so displayed. And maybe, not 100%, in authentically in the way that it was then. But there's this harmonious blend of the traditional and modern that occurs in Kyoto.
Kyoto does have a lot to offer. I feel like no one can go wrong with Kyoto. So
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with you.
and one thing you said that really hits home is the how modern and traditional culture kind of lives side by side, and that carries throughout the country, which is one of my favorite parts about it. It's just you could be in a middle of a city and then you just stumble across this little tiny alleyway that leads to a temple or a shrine. It's just kind of really cool to kind of discover those on your own when you're just walking around places. It's funny you say one place, but it's one of the islands actually that we brought up, the Big Four, that we didn't really highlight too much earlier on, which is Shikoku. Specifically, if you're traveling there, one of the big reasons people go is for the 88 temple pilgrimage that goes around the entirety of the island. It's like 800 miles of going from Temple 1 to Temple 88, and actually Temple 89, which is number 1 all over again, because Buddhism is a circle and everything is cyclical. There is no start and there's no finish. So that would be my place, because Shikoku is kind of considered the forgotten island. Um, it not only forgotten by tourists, but forgotten by modernization, and it's full of nature. So if you're really into whitewater rafting, or if you're into, um, you know, hiking and mountain climbing and stuff, that's there. If you're into surfing, that's there. Like there's beautiful beaches out that way as well. But for my opinion, if you're going to be able to go out there, and it's a bit of it needs some time to do this. But if you're going to do the pilgrimage, you could do it by foot, which takes about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, or hitchhike or drive a car, whichever you prefer. But it's a great way to get around the whole entire island, visit each one of the 4 prefectures, and really see a beautiful culture that lives and exists within just that area of the country of Japan. It's very different from and very removed from the rest of areas I've been able to travel to.
That's so interesting that you kind of shone the light on Shikoku, because my nerdy self, I only know Shikoku for one thing and one thing only, and that
What's that?
well, they have this huge, like, anime theme park. They have, like, different sections of the theme park, and one of them is, like, you can zip line through, Godzilla, you can go.
All right, I'm going there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, it's
that's a
so
valid reason.
cool. You can do that, you can go visit the village in Naruto, it's just so many things that you can do, with anime, and they have all these parks, and, I mean, that's one of the things that I wanna do one day.
What about you, Jen? What would be your place?
Okay, so my number one, which was really hard to decide because I'm sad that Maddie couldn't join us for this episode because she probably would have chosen Okayama, which is a really great city to go visit, which I would have agreed with her. It has amazing castle, has amazing garden, a lot of history. But my personal number one that I want to shine some light on is Nagano. Not many people know about Nagano. They don't go to it. I don't know why. But one of the things that I like about Nagano and I like to feature about it is, I'm not a beach person. I have sensitive skin, so sunlight is like evil for me. I can't do it, so I have to think of like other ways to kind of enjoy nature. And so mountains are my thing. And Nagano is perfect for people who love the mountains. In the mountains, they have tons of onsen areas. And even one part of the mountain, you can go visit the monkeys that are in the onsens and they're bathing and you can watch them. It's so much fun. So I really like Nagano for the scenery of its mountains. It's a very beautiful prefecture and a beautiful city too, as well. That has like a famous temple, and just it was a really good experience, and it was a good place to just step away from the chaos of the really big cities. It was a really good experience. So that's what I would choose is Nagano.
And it's funny you mentioned um, Nagano and monkeys, because one time my buddy who lived in Gunma, we met up at his place and we were driving to Nagano, and to get there you'd have to cut through the mountains to get to Nagano, and on the way driving through the mountains there was a giant ape in the middle of the road, just sitting there, and it would not move. We were just sitting in a car waiting for about 15 minutes, and after honking the horn at it, we tried to like kind of inch closer to like get it to move. Just sat there staring at us. Like it was it's crazy. I mean, it's not in apparently it happens all the time, especially in the mountains, but like those they just kind of sit there, and you don't want to get out of the car because those guys are not the nicest monkeys out there. So and this is a big one. Yeah.
I don't know why, but I imagined y'all, at this standstill with this monkey, and it just popped in my head. But those old messing with Sasquatch commercials. Do you remember this? You honking the horn, and it just comes and throws the car off like a cliff or something like that.
Yeah, you get out the car to push him. He's like, "Get your hands off me, you damn dirty ape!"
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like a lot of people, especially animal lovers, would really like that area of Nagano where, you do get to see the monkeys, because the monkeys that I'm talking about in the specific mountain region, it's like a park and they're very used to tourists. You can't feed them, obviously, but they are in the open air with you. One even sat on my foot for like a good 5 minutes. But it's a really good experience for people who like animals and who want to experience like just different aspects of Japanese culture through animals. So that's another good reason to go to Nagano, is those monkeys. They're pretty cute. They're pretty darn cute.
Yeah, that's a really good recommendation. I would love to do the bathing with monkeys thing.
Oh,
It's
no,
been
no,
on
no,
my
no,
bucket.
no. You don't get to bathe with them.
You don't get to bathe with them?
No. Oh my God.
I thought there are
No.
places where you could get in the same hot spring as a monkey.
No. That
Maybe
is
not in
not.
Nagano, or just not in general.
So here's the thing. It could possibly happen. I remember the onsen resort that we stayed at, they had a outdoor hot spring, an onsen for us to use. And it was fenced off, so like no one could like see you or anything, but monkeys can climb those fences. So technically a monkey could like peeping Tom on you, but other than that, you don't want a monkey to bathe with you. No. That's very dangerous.
Damn it! There goes my bucket list. Godzilla's still in there though, zip lining.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Godzilla's still there. Trying to bathe with Godzilla too.
Maybe.
Don't think that's gonna end well for you.
Yeah. But yeah, so with that, now that we shared, our personal go-to travel plans for Japan, we're gonna kick it off to our interview that we had with Kay. And she was a great resource for all things travel Japan. So we have Kay Allen, the Deputy Manager for Japan National Tourism Organization in the Los Angeles office, here with us today.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Kay, for coming on to this show. We really appreciate it. One of the things that a lot of people always, want advice on is, traveling to Japan, because it can be such a pleasure, but it can also be maybe intimidating for some people. So we're hoping that you can kind of help ease people's worries through this interview. But first, we actually want to, ask our guests usually any kind of connection to New Orleans. So like if you've been, and if you have, do you have any like memories of coming here? But if not, when you hear someone say New Orleans, what do you think of?
So unfortunately, I have not yet had the pleasure to go to New Orleans. I want so badly to visit, so it's going to happen one day. But I think for me, when I travel, one of the big things is food. So when I think of what I want from a trip to New Orleans, I think of kind of sitting at a cafe in the French Quarter and eating beignets and drinking chicory coffee. And I think that's probably the first thing that pops into my head of the ideal morning in New Orleans.
That's awesome. Yes. So if you ever want to come down and try some beignets, Doug and I will be happy to show you around.
I would love that. Thank you.
So now that we got the icebreaker out the way, can you tell our listeners more about yourself, your Japan journey, who you are and how you got interested in Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. My story kind of started pretty early on in life. I ended up interested in Asian art in general because my grandmother was a collector. And so I kind of grew up with this really intense fondness for Asian art. And then when I was about 8 years old, my aunt ended up hosting an exchange student from Japan, from Osaka actually. And he taught me a couple of words and phrases. And it was like I got bit by something from that point on. I just really wanted to learn Japanese. And my parents were supportive and, bought me some books and computer programs. And when I was finally old enough, I was taking Japanese classes at the community college when I was probably all about 13. And I found out about a study abroad program when I was 15 years old and begged my parents to come to the meeting about it, and then ended up signing up and going to live there for a year when I was 16 years old. So I did half my junior and senior year in Japan. And it's really just continued since then. It was my field of study in university, and I was lucky enough to make this into a career. But yeah, it started just real young, and then now I work with the Japan National Tourism Organization, and our chief goal is to aid international travelers in visiting Japan, whether it be their first time or their 100th time, and give them as much information and guidance so that they can feel super confident when they're moving throughout the country, and keep them updated, especially right now. I think it's super paramount to have all of the information on travel. But yeah, that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
Where did you study abroad? What city or prefecture?
I lived in Mito City in Ibaraki Prefecture, which is probably a lesser known prefecture just north of Chiba.
Joban line?
Yep, Joban-sen. That's correct.
I lived in Iwaki for 3 years, so I'm pretty familiar with Mito.
Oh
That's
my
awesome.
gosh. What a small world.
Yep.
Small world, everyone's kind of been in like little places that everyone else kind of knows about. That's awesome. Even though you said, it's such a not as well recognized place by people, it's interesting to find that like fellow, adventurers who went to Japan, whether it was for study abroad, vacation, or anything like that. You can make a connection through where you've been. It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. I love it.
But I actually have a question for you, Kay. How did you get into the profession of working for Japan National Tourism Organization? And did you always want to work in tourism?
So I didn't actually know what I wanted to do with this skill set. And it took me a while to realize that it could actually be turned into a career, and kind of which way I wanted to go. And for a while, I kind of contemplated maybe doing interpreting or translating. But I actually ended up being sort of scouted randomly by their hiring agency because of my background with the Japanese language and having lived in Japan. And when I went in for my interview, I recognized the logo that they had been using at the time for promoting the organization and Japan. And it was originally in its infancy called Yokoso Japan. And that was kind of like one of the earliest iterations of the Japan National Tourism Organization's campaigns. And I remember seeing it in the airport when I first arrived as a little fresh-faced 16-year-old baby. And that it kind of stuck with me. And so in my interview, I brought up that I remembered the logo and the campaign and their work when I had first arrived in Japan, and that kind of stuck with them too. And they thought, what a funny sort of connection to have. So I think that helped a little bit maybe in getting the job. But I really don't think I could ever look back from working in the tourism and travel industry. It's really such a fantastic and lively industry. And I really love what it is that we do. I mean, being able to go to work every day and just be there to inspire people and show them how to make the most out of their travel journey. It really, I can't think of anything else that would make me happier.
Just curious, does your job require you to use Japanese like on a daily basis, or is the staff more using English in since you're located in LA versus Japanese?
It's not a strict requirement. It's definitely helpful, but we do make a lot of accommodations for our local staff. We have 22, I think 22 right now offices throughout the world, and everybody's communicating in different languages in addition to Japanese. So Japanese kind of ends up being sort of the unifier between all of our different staff, along with English, because a lot of the other offices do use English as well. But it's not a hard requirement. It definitely helps a lot. And in a given day, I really speak more Japanese, I think, than I do English or some combination thereof, because we do have a couple other local staff. And I think when we converse between two local staff members, we're usually speaking in English. But the majority of our staff comes from our Tokyo headquarters. So they come with a varying degree of English ability. So it definitely helps in the communication process to be able to speak Japanese. And it's definitely helped me to grow my language ability too, to be speaking it throughout the day. And we get emails in Japanese too. So yeah, it's not a hard requirement, but it definitely helps.
Yeah, I definitely agree about that immersion. You kind of have to use it sometimes, and it definitely helps with if your desire is to grow your language ability, that you have that kind of daily requirement to use it almost throughout the day with your coworkers, or maybe if you're sending an email to a boss or something. So that's always kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question we have for you is more so about the importance of tourism for Japan. Obviously with the pandemic, it's kind of restricted people from moving around the world, and specifically in this case, entering into Japan. And especially with the Olympics kind of looming out there too, and there was a lot of kind of people not being sure of how everything was going to be handled. So, in light of those travel restrictions that came, or that just kind of came into light recently about foreign visitors during the Olympics, what is the emphasis going to be on tourism in the coming years for those people who are looking to scratch that itch post-pandemic, since they can't come during the Olympics? That was supposed to be the big draw, but obviously, unfortunately, they can't. So, is the emphasis going to be even much more so on tourism post that time? And then, how will that approach to attracting tourists differ from how it may have been approached pre-pandemic days?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first portion of that question is pertaining to how important tourism is for Japan, and it's hugely important. And this last year was definitely a challenge for, I think, everyone throughout the world, with us being no exception. And we had been on this really wonderful trajectory of real growth. I joined the JNTO back in 2015. And at that time, we were still kind of growing into this market, particularly in reaching Americans. And we just saw a huge jump and, a real recognition of how important tourism could be to Japan, and to revitalizing those country areas, those countryside destinations. And it's really really brought just an incredible infusion of life to places where maybe we've seen some depopulation and things like that. And I think, you can see that in other destinations as well throughout the world, where tourism has really helped to revitalize a lot of previously unknown or lesser traveled areas. But in light of the current travel restrictions, tourism is going to only increase in its importance going forward in the coming years. And we're really looking to draw people much in the same way that we have before to those more, lesser traveled areas, but also with more of an emphasis on getting out of doors. We think that, currently people have been moving more towards outdoor activities where they can travel because it sort of seems to be the safest option, that if you're going to be around other people, being outside is probably the safest in lesser crowded areas. And so we're definitely going to be emphasizing that outdoor travel option and adventure travel, I think, as well. Really introducing people to the things that you can do in the Japanese countryside, in the mountains, on the beaches, in the forests, so that they can kind of scratch that travel itch, but do it in a way that is exciting and safe. And I think will really show people a different side of Japan too. I think there's this built up kind of idea of what the country looks like. And one of my favorite things to do is sort of challenge that and show people all of these different sides that Japan has, everything from the, subarctic in Hokkaido on down to the subtropical in Okinawa, and what a huge difference in regions there are throughout the country. And no two places look exactly the same. They all offer something really different and incredible. So I think going forward, this is going to be more of an opportunity to showcase that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. There's a lot of, Iwaki, as we kind of brought up briefly earlier, is Iwaki City, but it's really a conglomeration of like smaller towns and rural areas. So each one of those, I traveled a lot within that city when visiting my schools, and you would go to these little mountain towns, and there's just such like culture. Like you really can experience a completely different side of the country that you maybe not have seen anywhere else, or maybe a dish or something that's like specific to that one area that maybe is a specialty or a delicacy.
Right.
So it emphasizing those and really pushing people to those countrysides, I think, is a great thing for the country, because it really does highlight some of the things that go ignored otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people don't really get an opportunity to see as much what cultural differences there are throughout the different regions of Japan, and how they really have their own unique flavor. And I really love getting the opportunity to show people just how different Japan can look from one place to the next.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's so many different aspects of Japan that, like, maybe a first time traveler wouldn't even think of. And that kind of brings me to my question that I want to ask you. Okay, is for first time travelers, they may be thinking of the big three, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, and they're not like really thinking about Japan in the overall sense. But they're first timers, so they don't really know how to travel Japan. So there are plenty of people that want to travel to Japan in the future, who have never gone before. So what kind of travel advice would you give first timers who are traveling to Japan?
Absolutely. This is a question that I get often, and what we like to let people know is that they can essentially do both. Have the first timer travel experience, but also sneak in some of those off the beaten path destinations. And having such a comprehensive public transit system really helps you to kind of get out into the countryside a little bit further, and and not stray too far off of maybe that well-worn path. So, for example, and what you call the big three, we refer to as the golden route. And we don't necessarily discourage people from, traveling the golden route. We understand that there is this feeling that if you're going to Japan, it would feel like a missed opportunity if you didn't go to Tokyo and Kyoto and see Mount Fuji and things like that. So we definitely understand that, but there are also opportunities along those pathways, or even just going a different way, where maybe your point A to point B is Tokyo to Kyoto. You also have the option of traveling to what we call the backside of Japan from Tokyo, and go to places like Toyama or Nagano or Ishikawa, going to go see Kanazawa. Which is another really beautiful artisan town, right on the Sea of Japan side. And you can take the bullet train to go to Kanazawa from Tokyo in about 2 hours. So not too dissimilar from, taking the bullet train straight from Tokyo to Kyoto. And from Kanazawa, you have a direct connection to Kyoto via the Thunderbird Express train, which, although not a bullet train, is still a very fast express train. So you can get to Kyoto in about 2 hours. So you can kind of travel this back route where you're hitting the same A and B, but maybe you've snuck in, a lesser traveled spot in between. And that helps to kind of spice it up a little, so that you feel like you've seen both sides, both the well-traveled and maybe the not so traveled.
Yeah, because I actually took a guided tour for my honeymoon because it was my husband's first time going to Japan. And even though we took the golden route, as you call it, and that's what they called it too, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, in between all of that, they took us to Hakone. They took us to Toyota, of all places, in Aichi Prefecture. They took us to like just kind of
Yep.
yeah, kind of just random places that, you probably wouldn't have thought of on your own. So, it was a really good feel for like a first time traveler. And then of course, we had the security of, having a guide and someone there to speak the language if, I couldn't, you know, go up to par with others, and it was just a really safe and secure way of traveling. And then once the guided tour was over, I took my husband on my kind of tour of Japan the week after. But yeah, no, as a first time traveler, you do want to see those iconic sites in Tokyo. You want to see Osaka and Kyoto, but you definitely do want to stop in those little places just to get a feel for like what's it like outside of those cities in Japan.
Absolutely. People are definitely looking for those unique, authentic local experiences, and we want to make it so much easier for people to be able to do that. Another bit of advice or tip I would give would be to definitely take advantage of the Japan Rail Pass. It's really a great way to kind of ride the rails and take advantage of day trips to off the beaten path destinations that are not too far off of those really well traveled spots. So even if, for example, you're going to Tokyo, you can take a wonderful day trip to places like Nikko, which is only about 90 minutes from Tokyo and would be fully covered by the rail pass. And I think it gives you a little bit more flexibility to make a schedule for yourself and see more of the country for less, definitely.
So for the rail pass, I know that covers most of the Shinkansen and most of all the local and kind of rapid trains and whatnot. But if someone was traveling, let's say from Tokyo to Hokkaido or Tokyo to Hiroshima or Fukuoka, which are kind of opposite ends of the country, would you still recommend the rail pass, or would you maybe look into like an airline? I know sometimes, especially from Tokyo to Hiroshima, is like, I want to say 6 hours. It might be wrong, but is that something where you would recommend maybe looking at airline, like domestic travel, via air?
Yeah, so you can definitely use any one of the many domestic and low cost carrier airlines to travel throughout Japan. There, I think, about 92 domestic airports throughout the country. So you really do have the option to kind of go through things quicker. I would say I always recommend to people, like for example, you were talking about doing Hokkaido and Hiroshima. We always try to recommend people not pack too much in just as a start. But if you are wanting to do some, destinations that are really far away from each other, like Hiroshima and Hokkaido, then yeah, you could absolutely use the rail pass and just get a shorter day span and maybe use that to go to Hiroshima from Tokyo. And then from Hiroshima, maybe you would fly. So you can, combine both in the same trip, but you would still want the rail pass for the benefit of saving on those really long haul rail trips, because that's where the Japan Rail Pass is really worth the purchase, is when you're going to be going far, uh, long distances by train. So if you did that Tokyo to Hiroshima, there's so many things in between those two destinations that the rail pass would really allow you to do some great exploring. And then, when you get to your final destination on the rail pass, then you can, opt to either fly back via some domestic carrier, or you could go on to another destination. And a lot of the airlines that you would probably use to purchase international uh, your international flight, they also offer bundled deals as well. So, for example, uh, alliances like One World and Star Alliance, which are, United being Star Alliance, and their partners, which would be all Nippon Airways. And then you have One World, which is Japan Airlines, American Airlines. And they offer, opportunities to get very deeply discounted, sometimes only about 5,000 yen, domestic tickets to different destinations like Hokkaido or Okinawa, places that you would want to fly to or that you have to fly to. And so you can purchase your international and your domestic together and save on that as well. So they're really great options to kind of stretch your dollar when you're traveling through the country.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. Because if you were going from Tokyo to, let's say, Hokkaido, Sapporo, or something like that, and prefer to take the train route, you would have to cut through Tohoku. And just recently, we did an episode on the Tohoku region of Japan for the 10th anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami. And one of the things we discussed with some of our guests on that episode was ways to still help that area to recover, and one of which was really just going and visiting and going and supporting those businesses in those local communities, is a very much direct way to impact and help that economy in that area. So, is Tohoku an area that you prominently feature when you're promoting travel to Japan? And if what are some of your top 5 places if you were to recommend someone to travel to the Tohoku area?
Absolutely. We do definitely promote Tohoku, and we work very closely with Tohoku. The Tohoku region has its own sort of promotional team that they work with the 6 different prefectures in that region to promote it. And I personally really love the Tohoku region. I think that it's a lot of times an overlooked area for travelers, and it is such a special, unique place, and the locals are some of the kindest, warmest people that you can come upon. So I would say definitely take advantage of the rail pass to travel through Tohoku, because it does take you all the way to Hokkaido if you should choose to go. You can stop in the southern Shin Hakodate Hokuto station. But between that, I mean, you have just, there's so many places that I could think of right now. Some that come to mind are Aomori. Aomori is a great, both Aomori City and the prefecture itself has some really beautiful hiking areas. The Oirase area in particular is just absolutely gorgeous. No matter the season, I mean, it's just very green and beautiful during the summer months, and then in the fall, when the leaves change color, it's just spectacular. They also have, of course, the very famous Nebuta Festival during August, and this is where you can see those very spectacularly lit lantern floats that are in all different shapes of, Japanese scenes from Japanese art and folklore. They also bring in a little bit of modern day pop culture as well. So it's really fun. I think we remember seeing a Star Wars float in the past as well. Another one would be Iwate. Geibike Gorge is one of, I think, just the most beautiful places that I've had the pleasure of visiting. And you can take what's called a funakudari, which is a ride downriver on these traditional flat rafts. And you have an oarsman that will steer the boat, and it's with a long pole. That's the only thing that they're using to propel and to steer the boat. So the upper body strength that it takes to do this is just stunning, first and foremost. But as they go through the area, they're telling you stories about the region. And this might be, a good place to have sort of a guide interpreter with you. But they also sing songs while they steer you downriver. And it's just such a really special experience to be traveling through this massive canyon, essentially this gorge, and having these beautiful folk songs being sung to you that are just sort of echoing off of the walls. So I would highly recommend that. Another to go to Fukushima, which you obviously have experience with. I think the Aizu, Wakamatsu area is really, really special. They have a very rich samurai history. Tsuruga Castle is very beautiful and fun to, go up inside and see the architecture, and you have beautiful views as well once you reach the top. But they have this very special tradition, and the Tohoku region has their own sort of brand of geisha. Some areas, I think particularly Iwate, they call them geigi instead of geisha. And in the Aizu Higashiyama Onsen area of Fukushima, there are a number of little onsen inns or ryokan where you can have a geisha come entertain you during dinner. And one thing special about the geisha in Fukushima is that they tell different stories, and they do different dances than any other geisha in Japan. And in particular, they tell stories of the samurai history there, and of the war that took place there and the samurai that fought there. And so the geisha that came to entertain our group when we were there did a dance with a katana, with a samurai sword. And it was really interesting and very special. So that's another cool one. I think Yamagata as well. I would recommend either Ginsan Onsen, which is this beautiful hot spring town that's built over a previous silver mine. And you can actually tour small portions of the silver mine, and the area is just so very preserved for what it was. So it's all wooden buildings and gas lamps and cobblestone streets, and especially in the wintertime, it's so very magical looking, and it kind of feels like you're traveling back in time. Also in Yamagata, I would recommend Yamadera. It's a mountain temple. I think there's about 1,200 steps or so that lead up the side of the mountain that take you to the temple itself. And it's a long trek. I've done it myself, but it is well worth the effort. And you have just the most beautiful views when you get to the top. And the temples themselves are really just built into the mountain itself. So it's a real feat of architecture and design, how they were able to incorporate these temples into really the very living mountain. So yeah, that's a real special experience as well. I mean, I could just go on and on, but those are a few of the really beautiful places. Speaking in particular to areas affected by the tsunami, you can't overlook Miyagi. Of course, and you're so right. It really is just getting back out into these communities and visiting and supporting the local businesses. And Miyagi is another just really, really fun destination and very lively. Sendai, the capital city, has Tohoku's largest nightlife district, the Kokubunsho area, and there's about, I think, between 2,000 and 3,000 bars and restaurants in just that little area. So there's just so many things to do there. But one of the really fun things is to do, I guess you could call it a pub crawl, where you would be hopping from izakaya to izakaya. So you can try, different sake from the region, or different beers, lots of food. They're really famous for the cow's tongue, seared cow's tongue, which may not be for some, but it is really delicious. So I highly recommend, if you're an adventurous eater, to give it a try. But also Matsushima is such a beautiful area, and it is regarded as one of the 3 most beautiful scenes in all of Japan. So the poet Basho, who did a whole sort of trek through Tohoku region, wrote in particular about Matsushima and just what a beautiful view it is of the bay and all of these little craggy islands that are covered in pine trees, which is where it draws its name, Matsushima Pine Island. And they're very famous for oysters. So if you go along the shoreline, you have these little oyster shacks or huts, and you can go in, and a lot of them are all you can eat for, you pay for an hour and you can eat as many oysters as you like in that time. And it is so lacking in pretension and formality. You're, sitting a lot of times sharing a table with other people in front of this kind of like teppan grill, and they literally bring the oysters in by the shovelful and pour them onto the grill, and then cover and steam them. And you just eat them as they are. There's no lemon, there's no hot sauce, there's no soy sauce. You don't put anything on them. It's just enjoying them exactly as they were pulled up, probably at 3-4 o'clock that morning. And you have a little bit of miso soup, which they've also put some lovely cooked oyster inside, and a bowl of rice. And if you want a drink, be it, a little soft drink or a beer, you walk yourself over to the little fridge and you pull it out yourself. And it's just a very great place to kind of experience local eats. So I would highly recommend that. And it's nice to see the love that people have for the islands themselves. They really credit the islands for preventing a lot of the damage that could have been so much worse for Matsushima, that the tsunami broke quite a bit on those islands. And so the gratitude and the love that the people feel for their city and for the land itself is palpable. And they're just some of the nicest, kindest, warmest people. So I can't speak highly enough about the Tohoku region.
Man, I want to go.
Let's head out.
I haven't been in a couple years, and I'm getting the itch. And all those places really made me want to hop on a plane right now. And also, I just finished dinner prior to this call, and I'm now hungry again. So, yeah. You mentioned Sendai and the pub crawls and just how much of a drinking town it is, and I can attest to that. I had a pub crawl one night and then crawling out of bed hungover the next morning, so I totally know that Sendai nightlife can be pretty fun.
Absolutely.
And actually, I mean, Aizu Wakamatsu too. That's we were talking kind of before, just on a small group call, and you named two places that I recommend too, like Matsushima and Aizu. I think Aizu is just such a cool place. Depending on what time of year you catch it too. I mean, cherry blossom time is beautiful. Fall time is beautiful. You might catch a samurai parade in the fall. That's one of the things I remember being able to catch there. So yeah, it's such a cool place. I love Aizu.
Me too. That was one of the places, living in Ibaraki, that we would go on vacation, on little road trips. So I first went to Aizu Wakamatsu when I was 16 years old, and I remember going with my host family, and that was my first time seeing a Japanese castle and having that kind of experience. And so it is really kind of just seared into my mind. Also going to the hot springs in that area too. So it's definitely a place that's special to me.
Yeah, it's definitely it has so much to offer, and you can go at any time during the year and get a different experience, but each time being pretty magical and pretty wonderful. So one other place that we have a pretty special bond with in New Orleans is Matsue City in Shimane Prefecture. Matsue is our sister city in Japan for New Orleans. So I personally went over there back in 2019 as part of a sister city exchange program. It was actually the first time I traveled from domestically by airplane in Japan. I had I traveled from Haneda to oh goodness, what's the name of the airport? The small
Izumo?
airport, Izumo Airport. Yeah, we traveled to Izumo Airport and did a week there, where we got to kind of sightsee and experience the city and the food and the culture and learn a lot about the history. So it was really, really, really great. So what were some of the things that, first of all, have you been to Matsue City before? And what were some of what are or were some of the things that you enjoyed most, or some things that maybe you would consider pretty notable?
So I have actually been to Matsue. I was lucky enough to go as part of an assignment with National Geographic Traveler, because we did cover Matsue, well, Shimane, for an article with them. And so we traveled to both Matsue, which I would highly recommend, visiting some of the real highlights, things like Matsue Castle, and the really beautiful kind of canals that they have, that you can take, boat tours in. But one of the things that I thought was really fun, that's kind of, not far off of Matsue, oftentimes I see them both, uttered in the same breath, but Tamatsukuri Onsen is such a lovely little hot spring town that is just right next to Matsue, and it's a beautiful retreat. And there's just the hot spring runs like a river through Tamatsukuri. So you can literally walk down these steps to the river from the street above and just stick your feet in, and just have a relaxing soak in the hot spring water. So yeah, Matsue is really a really special place. And one of the cool things about Matsue Castle in particular is it's actually one of the 12 remaining original castles in Japan. So if you're looking for, a piece of Japanese history that's largely, unchanged at all from when it was originally built in I believe the 1600s, then Matsue is a great place for you to kind of go and visit. But there are some other great highlights that are not far off as well. Adachi Museum of Art is such a beautiful place to experience Japanese gardens and this really unique art of what they call framing, where they position windows in front of garden scenes so that when you're looking through the window, it feels as though you're looking at a piece of art mounted on a wall, but it's actually a real life scene out of nature. And you can see that a lot at Adachi Museum. So that's a definite highlight of that area. And if you go to Matsue, there is more to see in Shimane as well, in sort of the outer lying areas too. And one that I think really can't be missed is going to the Oki Islands. And you can do that from Izumo Airport. Take a very short, it can't even be more than 30 minutes flight on a, little commuter plane. And the Oki Islands are actually a global geopark. So you can see some really unique formations, geological formations created by, everything from underwater volcanoes to the shifting of tectonic plates and things like that. And they've got a museum dedicated to it too, so you can really learn about what makes the islands so unique and so special. But it's also a great place to sort of see that really unique local life up close and personal. One of the things that we did was actually meet with a local fisherman. And he was one of, I think, the coolest people I've ever met in my entire life, because we went to go visit him at his house. And while we're interviewing him and photographing him, he's kind of sewing and repairing his fishing nets and, just talking to us about it. And he takes us on a tour of his house, and he was also an artist. So he was showing us his paintings and telling us stories about why he painted each one. And he was also a maker of pit viper whiskey, which this is something that you can see in certain places throughout the countryside, including Fukushima. But he would actually go into the forest and catch pit vipers by hand and make whiskey. They call it whiskey, but essentially there's a lot of health remedies that they can use it for. So everything from burns to allergic reactions to things like that, rashes, they would use this whiskey. And he said it's not necessarily something that you would normally drink, but you can do. But he showed us his collection of homemade pit viper whiskey, and it was just one of those things that you go to these off the beaten path places and you find something just completely unexpected and different. And one of the coolest things we did while we were there as well was travel up to this shrine that sumo wrestlers often visit, because the shrine is actually somewhat behind a waterfall. And the water is supposed to be what they call winning water. So the sumo wrestlers would travel to this area and drink from the water, and it would supposedly help them to win their tournaments. And so when we had first arrived, we were actually at the tail end of a typhoon, unfortunately. So we were feeling, a little deflated that things might be rained out and it might be difficult to get anything done that day. And so we figured we would just go visit this shrine. And when we got up there, the rain had made the experience so much more magical than we ever could have thought, because we're just surrounded on all sides, where you have the waterfall, the river below, the rain coming down in the forest, and it's just like this big, beautiful green cedar forest. And it was like you could see the whole forest breathing around you with just this sound of water. And I remember standing behind the waterfall looking out at the shrine below and taking a picture. And I think it's still one of the best pictures I've ever taken in my life. And it came out of something that we thought was going to be an unproductive or rained out day. And I think that's just the very nature of travel.
Man, that sounds amazing. The I actually went to Adachi Museum during the exchange program, and like you, it's just hard to put to words the garden pic, the scenery that you can see, the gardens that they keep, they talk about their upkeep and what it requires throughout the year, because it is a year long or year round maintenance of those gardens. It's just phenomenal. But they look so nice. I pictures don't do it any justice. And then it's funny you mentioned Tamatsukuri Onsen. Actually, I went there too. My host family brought me there one night to go to the hot springs. So it was pretty great.
Yeah, no, that's probably one of it's up there as one of my favorite little hot spring towns. And of course, you have to also visit Izumo Shrine as well. It's one of the oldest and most sacred shrines in Japan, and it is supposed to be the place where all of the gods meet in October, I believe. And so October is called the month without gods, because everywhere else in Japan there are no gods, because they're all convening in Izumo to determine the fate of the world for the coming year.
Yep. That was we went there. That was one of the places that the city actually took us to Izumo Taisha.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, it was right in the beginning of October, so it was kind of like that, depending on when the lunar calendar kind of hits in
Gotcha.
at the end of October, early mid October, something like that. But yeah, it's such and it's set with the background of like the mountains or hills that are kind of around there. So if you get there during peak like fall, autumn foliage, it's just you can start to see it when we were there. But I know I've seen pictures of when it's just the spattering of orange and red and yellow. It just looks so good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually a way that you can incorporate your visit to match the Kojiki, which, chronicles a lot of the mythology of the creation of Japan, the Japanese archipelago. And I've seen some books that show you how to, visit different places in that are mentioned in the Kojiki. And you can still go to them today. So it's really kind of an interesting, like, mythology meets real world travel.
That's so cool. Man, y'all are making me want to go to Japan and just explore so many places. But now I'm interested in your personal opinion. What is, and this could be like the hardest or the easiest question that someone could ask you. What is your personal favorite place in Japan? And like, what is your favorite thing to see and do while you're in Japan?
Oh man, I think I'm probably going to be on the harder end of that spectrum. It's hard to pick a favorite. It feels like picking a favorite child or something. But I think a lot of the places that I've mentioned are some of my more favorite travel memories. But I think one that I haven't yet touched on that still is super special to me is uh, Ishigaki Island in Okinawa. I think the kind of farther flung southern islands of Okinawa are so very special. I think when people go to Okinawa, they go mainly to the main island, which nothing to knock about that. Okinawa's main island is also really awesome and very fun to visit. But I love kind of seeing the very unique culture, that unique Ryukyu culture, which would be, the previous culture of Okinawa that is still very much alive today. And places like Ishigaki, you really are getting kind of away from seeing really anybody else besides other Okinawans. And not a whole lot of travelers really get out there unless you're kind of a diving enthusiast. So it's a great place if you're looking for something that's a little bit more exclusive feeling or secluded feeling. And Ishigaki is part of the Yaeyama chain, which is the farthest southern islands in the Okinawa chain. And it's actually closer to Taiwan than it is to mainland Japan. So you're really out there. And it's subtropical and gorgeous with just those white sand beaches, crystal clear water that's warm like bath water. It's incredible for diving, for snorkeling. But what's super interesting is that each island in the Yaeyama chain is totally different. You know, you have Iriomote Island, which is like jungle, just mangrove forests, rivers that you can kayak through. You can nature trek to waterfalls. You can see, endemic species that you won't find anywhere else in the world, like the Iriomote cat. So it's kind of like doing like a jungle adventure. And then Ishigaki is more of that very kind of tropical feeling. You want to dive when you're there. You want to snorkel. And then right next to Ishigaki, about 15 minutes by ferry, you have Taketomi Island, which is this teeny tiny little island right off the coast of Ishigaki that really there are almost no cars on the island. It's only, a few miles in diameter total. So most people walk around the island or they bicycle, but you can also take a ride on a water buffalo cart. And the water buffalo instinctively know how to get through these narrow, curved little pathways. I think calling them streets is a bit generous because they're just, dirt paths. And the Okinawan architecture is really one where you've got those red clay roofs, but the partitions between houses, the walls are all made of this coral, kind of black, and it's like coral or like a volcanic rock, but it's this kind of like black rock-like material that they use to make these walls. So some of the spaces are so tight, but the water buffalo know exactly how to turn the cart without ever even coming close to hitting. And so that frees up the driver to sing. And they play the sanshin, which is not too dissimilar from a shamisen, but it's a 3-stringed, essentially banjo, Okinawan banjo that's usually covered in snakeskin and of a particular water snake that is all around the Okinawan islands. And they just sing you these local folk songs as you're riding through this very traditional Okinawan village. And it's usually like open concept, open to the air. So it's got this very unique look and feel to it. And the locals are so friendly and very lively. And if you're walking through a little, area where there's some izakaya, there will be people who are dancing, in the restaurant that will pull you in to dance with them. Doesn't matter if they've never met you before in your life. They want you to come and join them and sing with them and have fun with them and clap. And you definitely want to try the food while you're there too. It's a blue zone, so their food is extremely healthy, very good for you, high in nutrients, vitamin rich, a lot of seaweeds, and unique vegetables like goya, which is kind of like a bitter melon. And you can find it in dishes like goya champuru, where it's mixed with egg usually and stir fried. They also have their own unique spirit that they distill in Okinawa called awamori. Highly recommend this. It's very good, but dangerous in that you can enjoy it and not realize how much you've had until you're dancing like crazy with the locals. But it is such a good time. And I think it's another place that I really keep a special place in my heart for.
Yeah, that's awesome because I actually have a friend that I just, got introduced to a few years ago. And, him and we always talk about Japan. And he's actually from Okinawa. And so he always tells me about Okinawa and how I should go visit. And when I do, I should bring him. And just you talking about Okinawa with like all of the information that I already know from my friend, it's like, Okinawa, number one thing to do on my list next time I go to Japan. Like it has to be done.
Absolutely. And another reason why it's so special to me is that my in addition to doing study abroad myself, my family also hosted students from Japan. And one girl who I'm still so very close with, her name is Chika. She was originally from Nagasaki, but she ended up becoming a diving instructor and moving to Ishigaki. And so that was the reason why I first went to go visit her. And so she was the one who was able to take me and my friends out snorkeling and diving. And she still lives there. And I'm absolutely, I told her, I messaged her the other day that the second that we're able to travel again, I am going to be out there to see her. And she is a little girl now, so I'm so excited to go visit. I haven't been there in a few years now, and I just can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome. And I actually had traveled to Okinawa almost 5 years. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I was in Okinawa 5 years ago today. It was in March of 2016, about 3 months before my son was born. So my wife and I were traveling there to visit a friend for his wedding, and we were only there for like 36 hours. It was crazy. We flew in, did the evening, kind of did some stuff in the morning and the day of the wedding. They had the wedding, and then we flew out the next day. We had a really tight trip, so didn't get to travel too much around there. We got to see the castle, which was really great. That was kind of like the highlight for me outside of the wedding, obviously. But but one other thing we did get to eat there was some of the ramen, and it was really good. So I really enjoyed that while I was there. One of my favorite meals on that trip, actually. Which brings me to our next question, because I'm a glutton for food and a glutton for punishment. And talking about food in Japan is going to make me crave it even more when I can't have it. So, a lot of people like to travel to Japan for sightseeing, but a lot of other folks like to travel for food and new food experiences, trying new cuisine. Um, you know, we've talked a lot about food already on this podcast, but if you had to make a recommendation of like one place to eat or one thing to try while you were in Japan, what would that be?
Oof, that's a tough one too. I have, mentioned a few things, but now that you talk about ramen, I'm taking us back to Fukushima again, because I think Kitakata ramen is definitely
Whoop, whoop.
such a good dish.
Yes.
And I would highly recommend going to Ochijuku, which is a little post town, which I'm sure you've been to. And it's, in Fukushima, away off the beaten path. And it's just these preserved little shops and houses that are all, with thatched roof buildings, and very modest and preserved, how they were 150 years ago or more. And you can go buy little handmade craft goods. You can try different local delicacies, but they also have some really fantastic ramen restaurants. And one in particular, which I'm completely blanking on the name of it right now, but would be happy to follow up. It is run by this family. And when you walk into the restaurant, they have what's called an irori, sunken hearth, inside, where they're usually grilling some sort of fish, probably ayu. And you just seat yourself, and it's like being in someone's home. You're in, it's all tatami flooring. There's pictures of their family all over the walls, personal shrines for family members. And the little oba-chan that runs the restaurant, and usually is sitting there tending the fire. Last time I was there, told me that restaurant has been in her family for like 300 years.
Wow.
So it's a very long tradition. And the ramen is so incredibly good. And it's usually, you can buy different types of ramen. The kitakata in particular, you're going to be eating with a stalk of spring onion. And no chopsticks. You just have to eat the ramen with the spring onion, which you can, use chopstick if you want to, but that's typically the traditional way, so that you're like flavoring the ramen with the taste of the onion. You're not necessarily biting into it as you go. You can do that at the end, but also the other ramen that they have, they will top with fresh tempura, and they're usually frying up whatever is seasonal. So sometimes it's some sort of flower blossom or local, mountain vegetable or root. And it's really delicious, and you're really getting the local flavor in every sense of the word. So that would be my recommendation for sure.
You're killing me. I can't. Is that the place that's near Aizu Wakamatsu? I want to say I think I've been there before too. It's like the little Edo period town.
Yeah, and I think that it has a little bit of a longer history, perhaps, but it is, mainly from that time period. And yeah, it's this little post town. I don't think it is too terribly far from Aizu.
Okay.
Typically, you're going to drive in to get there, almost assuredly, whether you're going in by bus or taxi or what have you. But it's remote, to say the least. So you will need to arrange for transportation to get there, but it's absolutely well worth the trip.
Yeah, I think the next time I have so many things I want to do the next time I'm in Japan. But one of the times my wife's mother lives in Ibaraki in Hitachi. So we do like little road trips every trip somewhere in that area. And I think Aizu Wakamatsu has been one of the places we've talked about going a lot of times, but just hadn't had a chance to go. Matsushima was the one we went to last time. But yeah, Aizu has so much to do, and our son is he's about to be 5, and he went to, when we were in Matsue, he was, oh god, 3, and I can't even tell time anymore with 2020 throwing me off for a loop.
Right.
But he really enjoyed the castle there. So, I think that's something, as he's gotten older, he'll really enjoy being able to go see Surugajo and some of those other kind of traditional Japanese style, like kind of cultural um, uh, tourist attractions. I don't want to say tourist attractions. Sounds, but things that people like to travel to those cities to see.
If they're in Ibaraki, I'm sure you guys have also probably been to Kairakuen as well, which is another sort of beautiful summer residence of a former shogun, with lots of gorgeous plum trees around. It's great to go there in March and see. I think there's something like 3,000 plum trees in that park alone, but it's beautiful in the springtime.
What's the name of it again?
Kairakuen. It's actually one of the 3 great landscape gardens in Japan. So you have Kairakuen in Mito, you have Kenrokuen in Kanazawa, and Korakuen in Okayama.
Yeah, I don't think we've actually been there. So that's another thing we'll have to put on the list of things to do. I should be taking notes right now.
I know, right? There's so much information to gain. But yeah, that's all for our questions. You've answered so many great questions with some great answers, and I'm sure our listeners are going to have a really hard time pinpointing where to go in Japan, because there's just so many wonderful places. I mean, you really, honestly, you can't go wrong. I mean, Japan has just so much to offer. And I think you've definitely proven that to us with this interview. So thank you so much for coming on and enlightening us and sharing your stories with us. And we really, really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I really think that you hit the nail on the head. You can't go wrong. Anywhere that you go in Japan is going to show you just a different side of the country. And there's always going to be immersive activities and unique ways to interact with locals and really experience Japanese culture up close and personal.
So, because you work for Japan National Tourism Organization, are there any specific sites or any materials that you would recommend people to like look up online so they could, kind of help guide their way on how to plan their travels to Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a dedicated website for travelers, and it's real easy. It's just japan.travel. And we've got a wealth of information there. You can search by the map, or you can search by your interest. You can, find information on where to find hotels, information for beginners to Japan, everything from currency to transportation to you name it, guide services, etc. There's just so much information on there. So I really say if you're considering a trip to Japan, that's a great place to start for planning your trip and really nailing down where it is that you want to go. But you can also always reach out to us via email as well through the website, and we're happy to answer your travel questions, give you recommendations, point you in the direction of, tour operators or, tour agencies if that's what you're looking for. We have great travel partners, so if you're looking for anything in particular, you can let us know and we can direct you. But we're here as an information desk, first and foremost, so anything that you want to know, we're happy to assist you as best we can.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kay, for coming on and supplying us with all this information. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. Definitely have some questions for some of those names of places that you recommended, and I can pass this on to my wife and be like, "Hey, why haven't you take me here yet?"
That's the real question. Everybody is welcome to, follow up with us as needed, and I can answer any additional questions. You can also follow us on social media. We're Visit Japan on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We've got YouTube channel. So feel free. I think on Instagram, we're visitjapan.us, and we've got lots of travel inspiration on there. So definitely follow us for more ideas of where you'd like to go. We so look forward to welcoming you all soon. And I think, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And so we're all, anticipating welcoming travelers back. And letting them really just get to see everything that Japan has to offer. So thank you so much again for letting me come on and tell everybody about Japan and why I love it so much. So thank you again.
And like that, this week's journey comes to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode, we gave you some notable places to go on your visit to Japan. From here, you should have more than enough to start narrowing down your Japan travel agenda. Although you may not be able to travel there now, you can have something to look forward to on your next Japan trip. Have you been to Japan or visited any of these places that we discussed today? Share your photos with us on Instagram and Twitter at Krewe Japan Podcast. That's KREWOFJAPAN Podcast. While you're there, subscribe and follow. Let us know how you are enjoying the podcast. That's it for today. Until next time.